many people are just going to assume that content is a solved problem because, hey, we have generative AI now, right? Translations is a solved problem because, we've got machine translation and, we have LLMs and all of these things. And people have read about this in The Economist or, Forbes magazine or something like that. Even very senior executives, for the last 3 years have been reading about these things. And in their head, then, okay, well, this is all solved. Fantastic. We can just generate videos and everything's going to be fine. Not quite. You're going to spend an awful lot of time talking to, legal teams. And, this is a whole new world of pain. And they're just different dependencies. I'm not by any means, kind of anti-AI, anti-technology, far from it. I kind of embrace this stuff. But I've also been working in this field long enough to know that everything comes with very, very, very significant limitations and dependencies. And we can't just kind of blithely ignore all of these things and just assume it's going to be fine. No, it'll be fine when we make it fine. That will take time.
Welcome to In Other Words, the podcast from Phrase, where we speak with business leaders shaping how organizations grow, adapt, and connect with customers around the world. I'm Jason Hemingway, CMO at Phrase, and today we're talking about the hidden operating system behind global scale: content. When companies expand, ambition is rarely the issue. Execution gets much harder when content has to scale across markets without losing quality and still remaining relevant. Our guest today has built and run content operations at scale in a few companies and scale their ever-expanding reach. Chris Dell spent 14 years at Booking.com building and leading its in-house content agency at its peak, a roughly 400-person global team responsible for marketplace and marketing content, community, and geo-data visual content. Perhaps we can talk about that a bit, Chris, and multilingual content delivery across 45 different locations worldwide. Chris now runs Next Chapter Advisory and Coaching and helps scale-ups and enterprise grow sustainably, develop leaders, and communicate strategic narratives that drive action. He's also a senior advisor with analyst firm Nimsy. Chris, welcome after that long introduction. It's great to have you with us.
Fantastic to be with you, Jason. Thanks so much for inviting me.
That's an absolute pleasure. So let's talk about you to start with. I always like to get into this idea of where does
the topic.
There you go, mine too. But this is about you. I always like to get into this idea of where you started your career, and you started building and leading, large content teams. But how did you first get into that profession, and what led to getting, to leading those big content operations in tech firms?
It's been a very non-obvious path. I studied history of art. Actually, I studied originally painting at Winchester School of Art, and then I studied history of art in London at the Courtauld Institute. I was determined to go work in the art world, so when I graduated, I was very fortunate. I got a great job at the National Gallery, and there I was a curator of photographic collections, which was fantastic. A dream job for a history of art graduate. I did that for a couple of years and then realized, okay, maybe working for the government isn't necessarily my preferred pace. So then I gradually moved into publishing. I worked at the Architectural Association for a couple of years, working on Weekly there, which I loved. Okay, then we did have some really nice pace. Pulling together content, writing content, picture research, all of these kind of different things. And then ended up working for a publisher called Thames and Hudson. It's kind of well-known publisher in London, New York. Focusing on very high quality illustrated books. So there I was absolute bliss because I got to work with every type of content. Typically we were working with multinational co-editions, international co-editions with lots of translated editions as well. So it was that was absolutely fantastic. I did some commissioning. I did a lot of kind of project management for them. Then I moved to Barcelona, worked as a freelance kind of editor, publisher, writer. Whole bunch of different things, lots of different companies, did quite a lot of translation work. I used to translate from Catalan, Spanish into English, and then got into Booking.com. Actually, I applied twice for Booking.com. I wasn't successful the first time, was successful the second time, a year later. So I started with them beginning of 2010. And as you mentioned, I think already, I started as a writer, individual contributor, completely happy with that. I'd mostly been kind of writing, creating content most of my career. But within a couple of weeks, it was obvious that they had other plans for me. So within a year, then I was leading a team locally. And then within a couple of years, I moved to Amsterdam to lead a team. globally. And then about 2.5 years in, they said, "Hey, do you want to be a director and just run content for us?" I guess I have to say yes.
Yeah.
It's too interesting an opportunity. So yeah, it's been a very circuitous route, but we got there.
Yeah. I mean, amazing. So from art to publishing to illustrative publishing as well, back into all of the content. That is an interesting journey. And you were at Booking for a long time, 2010 to 2024, I guess 14 years. And you moved from that kind of, it's really interesting because you moved on that hands-on where you're doing it to kind of leading that. And I said at the beginning, a 400-person content organization. When you built and scaled that in-house content sort of agency or team, what was the core business problem you were set out to kind of solve with it? It wasn't just writing. It wasn't just writing art. It's a very different proposition, right?
No. I mean, categorically within Booking, everything we did with purpose. Of course, it was very, very tightly run, very disciplined organization. And I had many, many different types of content that I was kind of responsible for, that I was leading, and each of them has a very, very specific business function, all of which will be pretty obvious, I think, for anyone who kind of thinks about it. So we have, let's say, hundreds of thousands or millions, it's grown to millions of unique properties that you can book. Each of them needs some content. It needs some visual content, photos of what it actually looks like, and it needs some sort of description, some sort of written content. So then how do you make sure you get the right photos, typically from partners? How do you make sure that you're writing the right sort of descriptions, that you need to translate the description? At the same time, another thing I was looking after was, how do you moderate all of the content, the user-generated content that we get? So people leave reviews for the particular properties, and you want to surface the right reviews. You also want to make sure that you're not putting anything online that is harmful or prejudicial in some way. So then if I look at all the different kind of types of content, then the description is there, I guess, to, let's say, drive trust and make sure that it's very clear what someone's actually buying. The review content is there because it's, I guess, social proof. And again, to build trust and confidence. People like me have experienced this kind of thing. The visual content, again, is to build transparency, to make sure that when you get there, it should look like what you thought it was going to look like. And then we had other types of content, such as editorial content, sort of much more upper funnel. So it's really about kind of engaging with people, giving people something to engage with if they're not looking to buy something straight away. Maybe it's just a little bit kind of planning, very, very kind of upper funnel concerns. And then we also have things like geodata, which you referenced in the introduction, which is basically, where are things? And there you're trying to make sure that when someone goes along and looks for Barcelona, that they're actually finding, let's say, hotels that are in Barcelona or what they would consider to be Barcelona. But of course, that can be a fairly flexible thing depending on whether you're a domestic or international traveler, et cetera, et cetera. So many, many, many different types of content, but yeah, each with their own kind of very specific objective. And of course, localization, was the biggest part of that. And there, fundamentally, we're trying to make the platform accessible for customers, but also for partners.
Yeah, accessible in every different culture that you operate in, right? And that's where it becomes a core part of that business, proposition that you're trying to put out there, is that we're where you are. We're driving those experiences where the customer are at. So I completely get it. And it's you've got all these different types of content, business purposes, different business purposes for those types of content. When you're talking to leadership teams, interesting to see where your kind of reporting line was to start with. But when you're talking to leadership teams, what are those hidden variables that make it harder than maybe those leadership teams would expect? Because oftentimes you get, we need to do lots of content, and AI is making that very easy. It's like, well, what kind of content? What's the business purpose of the content? All valid questions. And then once you start getting into, well, we need to localize it, and can you just make that happen? It's like, well, it's not as simple as it sounds. What are those hidden variables from your perspective that you have to discuss with leadership when they say, make our content scale globally, for example?
Yeah. And it was interesting. Generally, no one was asking me explicitly to kind of scale content. It was just kind of understood that if we're, let's say, going to grow our total number of properties available, that this will have knock-on impact. one of the rather beautiful things about booking, particularly if I go back to, say, when I first became a director, so that was 2013, and I was leading the department, is that it was a very kind of very hands-off place, very, very transparent. We would share at a leadership level, this is the strategy, these are our goals for next year, this is how we want to grow, figure out for yourself what that means for your area. Which is a lot of fun, actually. Nobody was actually ever kind of, sitting down with me and saying, Chris, you have to, scale this. No, Chris, this is what growth potentially looks like. These are the markets we're interested in tackling. Maybe these are the sorts of properties, or even new verticals, because obviously bookings evolve from just hotels to, many other verticals, like, flights and attractions and things like that. This is what's on the horizon. It's up to me then to go away and really figure out with my own team, with my own leadership team in content, like, hey, what does that mean for us?
So how do you go about doing that as just a sort of intellectual exercise? So the business gives you, but the business objectives. Well, okay, right. Now, what do we do about that?
What you're doing a lot of the time is looking at your existing process and saying, okay, fine, can I, and a lot of time it wasn't just 10x this, but can I 100x this? And you stress test it a little bit. So you basically, okay, which part of the funnel is going to break first? I mean, that's one thing I've learned through working very closely with operational excellence teams also over the years, and just, I mean, I'm fascinated by kind of just creating tight operations, but you only ever need to tackle one bottleneck at a time. In any process, there's one big bottleneck. You tackle that first. You don't worry about where the secondary bottleneck is, because that'll become the primary bottleneck, and then you tackle it. So basically, in any process, there will always be one piece that will let you down. You just need to have good visibility on where that is, and understand, hey, if we go to 100x, what part's going to break? What can we do then preemptively to make sure it doesn't break? Or sometimes you accept that it will break, and you just flag to the business, probably this is going to break in Q2, Q3. We'll then fix it. But I mean, and it was often, human processes, obviously, considerably more fragile when it comes to scalability. Things like quality management, if you're not careful, can really start kind of slowing you down. But if I think of all the different processes we were running, typically it was the human component, and humans can always bring value in a process, but are we definitely kind of directing them to the right part? And by the way, what's our fallback position? So in a sense, my expectation was always things will go wrong. What happens next? What's the fallback position? How can we, for example, change a quality management process to make it lighter so that we can still get through a kind of peak season or something like that? And sometimes it just broke. Sometimes it broke.
So if you're a CEO, then you're sort of advising one, and you're looking at these processes, what are those early signs that might tell you that content operations are slowing growth or it's broken? What would you look for? How would you advise?
I mean, I think as a CEO, you always want to kind of keep your ear to the ground. and it'll become very, very obvious very quickly where the pain points are, because if you listen to the kind of gossip and the rumor, it's always obvious where in the overall chain something is breaking. And then as a CEO, you just have to be able to kind of identify that quickly and then step in and basically kind of, hey, what support do you need to get this back on the road? Because again, typically, if you look at something like travel, incredibly seasonal, and the peak is when things are going to break, and the peak is when you most need things not to break. I mean, it's very, very important. For many consumer organizations, it'll be pre-Christmas. So that's when every system's going to be tested. That's when you have to really kind of keep your ear to the ground, really understand what's happening, and be able to kind of move in very, very quickly, surgically. So I think it's just a kind of general awareness of organizational dynamics is what tells you when things are really starting to go wrong. Because, of course, content, generally speaking, won't have immediate impact on bottom line or even top line.
Yeah.
Where it could snarl something up in a very high growth environment is, hey, are we able to ship as much product as we need? And if we see then, that, hey, we're shipping product much slower, we're not able to get things live as quickly as we were, a couple of quarters ago, that sort of very, very operational day-to-day metric you kind of want to stay on top of.
Yeah, they're the kind of tells.
There are always tells. But again, typically you'll hear something before the data reveals it.
Okay, that's interesting. And so when you got that kind of operating measurement or decisions that are coming in you, what's the biggest difference you can make in the teams to keep that quality, especially when we talk about those peak times, for example, like Christmas or the summer period for somebody like booking? You're expected to do much more, and so the systems are being tested. What's the operating decision-making framework that you might use to sort of stay on top of it?
Talking about, kind of booking when I joined, one of the things I absolutely loved about the organization is that it was slightly kind of anarchic, which is to say power was often radically decentralized. And that was the kind of general principle. I mean, it was something I absolutely loved about the culture at that point. It was still, I'll just say as a shorthand, it was very Dutch. But what I mean by that is, not the hierarchy didn't really matter. What mattered were ideas and the ability to have a great conversation around ideas and to be able to challenge. And I think there was a widespread belief across the entire organization that a really great idea can genuinely come from absolutely anywhere. And in fact, it's more likely to come from people with dirty hands who are actually doing stuff every single day because they're much, much closer to the customer, to the process, et cetera, et cetera. So in general, I didn't, while we can generate huge amounts of data about how an operation is running, I would still want people in local teams to be able to make decisions as to, hey, what can be deprioritized in a particular moment if there is a bottleneck. And that's particularly true with something like quality management, which can very, very, very easily become a bottleneck. That if a local team is completely comfortable with the way things are going, then they can also make an executive decision, hey, we're going to do considerably less quality checking on particular types of content or something like that. We're just going to kind of let some stuff through, and maybe some things will need to be fixed later, but let's be kind of pragmatic and practical about this. So you need to know always, like, hey, where are the potential overspills in any process, that if things really, really get busy, I am not in a brilliantly placed to make the right decision around quality management for 46 different languages. I speak 3 or 4. But only one of them probably I can really be trusted to do quality management, just about.
Yeah.
So there are other people who are much more capable of making decisions, also in terms of prioritizing work, or what matters more or less, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think some of that's down to sort of your appetite for risk in certain places, and people being able to assess the local risks when you're empowering different, I don't know, if you operate a kind of hub and spoke kind of model where, those kind of people are empowered to make decisions based around a set of risk parameters that everyone finds sort of acceptable.
I mean, obviously you want to reduce risk. And in this context, risk, I mean, something that's potentially, non-compliant, but typically we're not going to get to there. It's actually, we're talking about customer experience. So it's something that's going to have negative impact on customer experience. Of course, you want to, control that as much as possible. You want to minimize that as much as possible. You want everyone having an amazing experience. But again, there are other people who are much better placed in the organization, much more junior probably in the organization, who can make these decisions. And I definitely don't need to get involved.
I like that idea of people with dirty hands. That's a great phrase. I love that.
These are people I really respect and admire. Who are basically close to the actual stuff being produced.
Well, let's move it slightly away from kind of the kind of operational side of things, because the content operation is one thing, but it's actually narrative is quite an important part of it, and particularly at bigger brands, I think that purpose, clear, repeatable stories. And what role does narrative play from your perspective in, keeping that fast growing business aligned? How do you keep everyone on that?
So for me, the critical thing is purpose. Why do we do what we do? Simple as that. I mean, you need it, I think, in your day-to-day life, but you also need it in a business context. And particularly if you're asking people to change a lot, if you're going through constant transformations, if you're going through constant growth, and the growth is going to go on for a long time, it's exhausting. Change is exhausting. It doesn't even matter if it's good change. And in booking, I was very fortunate to go through many years of really good change as we grew and, the brand grew, etc. But it meant constantly reconfiguring everything that we were doing. And to really kind of take people with you, you need very, very powerful narrative as to why the work that you're doing matters, why it is important that we keep growing, why it's important that we change the way that we do things. So I realized like you need very regular touch points. You need to be incredibly transparent. I'm a huge fan of transparency from a leadership perspective. People are perfectly smart. We're hiring very intelligent adults to do, who have agency and autonomy and are capable of figuring stuff out for themselves if you give them the right insights, the right data, etc. But of course, there is a responsibility always. You can't just present raw data. You also have to tell a story around it. You have to make it meaningful. You have to give the right context. So it's, I think, what I was always trying to do at Booking, and what a lot of what I'm doing since is just building a bridge between strategically, this makes sense, but now can we take everyone with us? Can we have a really compelling story? And I'm not talking about leaders should never lie. We don't want to distort the truth. If there are problems, and obviously say in 2020, with COVID and everything, a company like Booking, the entire travel industry was hit extremely badly. There's absolutely no point saying, hey, everything's totally fine. Everything's going to be okay. No, it's not. We've lost a huge amount of our business and we have no idea when it's going to come back. That's also a very important moment to be very, very, very transparent. That rule of transparency, it has to be there in good times and bad. But it's equally important in good times because it's what lets you take people with you.
And it's interesting. So that's talking about taking people with you, and you've also talked in different keynotes that I've seen where you talk about how reporting lines shape how a team is understood. So reversing that out and going upwards. How did those global content leaders or the people in those teams frame their value to those different stakeholders, or how do they build that storyline upwards, perhaps?
It's always a really challenging one, right? I mean, I know a lot of people who work in content and localization, internationalization space. And there are so few companies out there, organizations out there who have really figured out where content people should sit. Because I mean, we already talked a little bit about, there were very pragmatic reasons why we were working on particular sorts of content. And logically, then you can say, well, that the scale, the international aspect, etc., means that maybe it sits very logically in a particular place. Sometimes I report into the COO, in which case then indeed I'm very much focused on scale, cost management, efficiencies, all the kind of classic things that a COO is going to care about, sitting alongside then, say, customer service, which has similar sorts of kind of concerns around scalability and global reach. So there are some interesting kind of interesting things to share there and learn from each other. But then other times I would be reporting into, say, CMO. And then, of course, I'm going to be much more focused on, hey, how do we expand and tell the brand story? Or how do we work with marketing channels to, because content becomes more and more important. Localization is important to every single part of the platform anyway. So you're kind of, then it's really around, hey, how do we make sure our content means that someone prefers Booking.com to any of the competitors out there? And it's not necessarily changing radically what you're doing day to day, but it's just the lens through which you're kind of looking at it, which actually can be quite exciting as well. Because again, if someone's been doing the same thing for a few years, that we suddenly have a slightly different lens that we can look at it through. It's actually it's kind of reinvigorating. Oh, okay, now I'm doing it for this reason, and that's kind of exciting. Personally, I love the fact that I kind of moved around the organization. So I was reporting into head of supply, head of demand, and at times very, very close to the marketplace itself. Because for me, I learned so much from the different parts of the business. and specifically, like, how do you tell a really effective story? I in general believe that, like, leaders, and particularly senior leaders, a large part of our role actually is just to do that kind of translation. Well, it depends how generous you want to be. So you can say we translate and we basically make, what we do intelligible and digestible to the people we kind of report into. You can also say, hey, we're a bit of a buffer for all the things that kind of come down, let's say new strategic direction, then you are the buffer where you're figuring, okay, I can absorb a lot of the ambiguity, and then I need to kind of create some clarity then for the people below me and actually kind of turn it into action. But either way, being able to tell stories up and down the organization, super important.
So let's kind of zero in on some of the audience that are particularly interesting to sort of you and I, and particularly localization professionals, localization leaders, and where they need to build. I think everyone knows they need to build that kind of influence beyond just production and service to the rest of the organization, but they're often stretched to hit between doing that and hitting deadlines for volumes of things that they need to get done. So from your perspective, what steps do you think they can take to drive that visibility and recognition where it feels like there's no time for anything beyond kind of delivery?
No, I mean, everything you're describing is super familiar. I mean, I've had a chance to meet with a lot of localization leaders recently. And time is a significant constraint. And unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand that fixes that problem, because I think we're just looking generally at a little bit of kind of constraint. There's resource constraint across, frankly, most parts of most organizations at the moment. So it's not something anyone in localization needs to feel they take it personally at all. No, because this is happening everywhere. Nobody has time. HR, finance, things like customer service, etc. All of these organizations are being kind of really optimized a lot at the moment, everywhere you go. But I think you have to, if you're not intentional around carving time out, you will just be stuck in the process operating mode, which is to say, if you don't block out a day a week in your calendar where you are going to focus on the future, you are rooted, stuck 100% in the present. And that's what I'm seeing a little bit at the moment. And that's really, really hard, because an awful lot of people in localization come from dirty hands, actually doing translation and, or really kind of understanding, the nuts and bolts of this stuff.
Yeah.
And therefore it's comfortable. And it's a nice place to be. People like their processes, and and also they're extremely expert in these things. They're very, very good at it, and we all like to do things that we're really good at. But then, like building strategy, for example, or building connections, or going out telling story, and all of these things, they can feel a little bit. It can feel a little bit salesy. Yeah. It can feel a little uncomfortable. It can be. It takes you out of a kind of something that you understand into something that isn't, necessarily what people have been taught or trained to do. But you have to carve out the time and to first really think about the future. And I don't think it's ever been more important, frankly, to have like a 3-year plan or even a 5-year plan. If you're, let's say, running a localization team or a content team. And by the way, it will change. Of course, it will change. No one has any idea what's going to be happening in 5 years' time. But you still need some sort of plan, something to be working towards that you can show the rest of the business. And again, stress test it, but also say, hey, what do you think about this? Does this respond to your needs as well? What do you need from content in the future? There are actually a very small number of very, very powerful questions that everyone should be asking their stakeholders on a regular basis. But again, because it can feel a little confrontational, and because, frankly, the answers sometimes can be unsettling. A lot of people aren't even really thinking about content a huge amount across many organizations. It's just something they sort of take for granted. That, I think a lot of people therefore avoid those conversations just because it feels a little kind of unsettling.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And whilst it's unsettling, it's a necessary thing to do, I think is the message.
What I do not want to sound judgmental in any of this, by the way. I'm sure, I mean, inevitably I will, because, I'm telling people, hey, you need to do some things different. So I will sound judgmental, I get it. But it really doesn't come from a place of judgment. It's coming very much from a place of, this is how we need to adapt to quite a radically kind of shifting business environment, where increasingly, if you're not telling people, hey, content is still important and still hard work, many people are just going to assume that content is a solved problem because, hey, we have generative AI now, right? Translations is a solved problem because, we've got machine translation and, we have LLMs and all of these things. And people have read about this in The Economist or, Forbes magazine or something like that. Even very senior executives, for the last, 3 years have been reading about these things. And in their head then, okay, well, this is all solved. Fantastic. We don't need, we can just generate videos and everything's going to be fine. Not quite.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is that those teams are the experts. They understand all the pitfalls of saying, yeah, you can just do it. You could do it that way, and your content will just fall apart, and you'll lose, your brand. You'll lose everything that we've built so far. You need guide rails to do this at enterprise production scale. Is not a solved problem by any stretch of the imagination.
And you're going to need to spend an awful lot of time talking to legal teams and. This is a whole new world of pain, and they're just different dependencies. And that's not. I'm not by any means, kind of anti-AI, anti-technology. Far from it. I kind of embrace this stuff, but I've also been working in this field long enough to know that everything comes with very, very, very significant limitations and dependencies. And that we can't just kind of blithely ignore all of these things and just assume it's going to be fine. No, it'll be fine when we make it fine. That will take time.
Very interesting. Anyway, look, let's lighten the load a touch with our. We're probably a little bit over midway through, but usually midway through, I ask all of our guests kind of one question, and you're no different, Chris. So I'm going to ask you what's the one thing that you wish you could automate in your workday?
I would like something that makes me a really good cup of masala chai in the afternoon. That's my ritual. Normally, 3, probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon, go make chai, and I like to boil the ginger and the cardamom. And I actually kind of enjoy this process. I like it a lot. But there are days when it would be fantastic if someone could automate that. I would absolutely love it.
You flick the switch.
In a couple of companies like startups that are actually working on this, and I've thought about investing in them even because I think if someone can fix that, I'd be extremely happy.
Well, they've definitely got a customer. Sounds like already.
Oh, well, yeah. For me, I would love it.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's get back into it a little bit. And we talked a bit about the idea of kind of stepping into the uncomfortable zone. And I guess part of that is about making sure that you can measure things correctly and understand the business value that the content teams are providing, right? So when in your experience, when you've moved measurement from just tracking to kind of that more business value approach, how did you do that, and how did you get people to see that, leaders appreciate that?
One of the challenges with content, obviously, is that we tend to measure the things that we can measure, and therefore they tend to be very, very operational things. It's things like how long does it take to produce a piece of content? What's the quality of the piece of content like? How much did it cost? How much resource did we need to put in to produce this particular piece of content? And that's kind of where it then kind of falls apart. That's because so all of that stuff highly controllable, but also incredibly reductive, very operational. It fundamentally just tells you that the process is going okay, but it doesn't tell you anything around the impact that you're having with content. And of course, it's notoriously hard, particularly in a kind of very large, complex platform, which could be booking, but frankly, could be any marketplace. I mean, of course, you can run A/B tests and all of these things to isolate the impact of a very particular sort of content. But one of the challenges with content is that it tends to vary an awful lot. So, for example, I mean, you could run an A/B test to say, this is the right photo for this particular hotel, but that only tells you about that particular hotel. You can then try and extrapolate something from that, which then potentially applies to all other content, but that's hard. You're going to have to be making a whole bunch of assumptions. So kind of getting that very direct kind of link is super hard if you're just operating by yourself. So if you're serious about looking at impact, you have to start working with the people who are really kind of consuming the content, which can be product engineering teams, can be marketing teams, And what's interesting, I mean, too often large companies in particular end up very, very siloed, and there is never enough kind of cross-departmental collaboration, etc. That matrix is always one of the first to suffer as companies get larger. But actually, there are answers in other parts of the business, and there's no reason why someone working in content should have to fix what the ultimate value of that content is if they can actually just punt it to people in, say, product and tech teams and say, can you figure this out for us? Why is it that you need this content? Now, again, it takes you into the kind of uncomfortable conversation territory, because it's, maybe it doesn't have value. Maybe it isn't needed. But it also takes you into the direction of, but let's actually start putting real numbers around real impact of these things. You also need to kind of get creative, because it could be, for example, that sometimes the content, again, in the context, let's say, of hospitality, but any kind of marketplace, sometimes the content will drive clarity, which means that later on, fewer people will need to reach out to customer service. But again, if I'm just producing content and worrying about a process that produces content, I have no idea. So to find out about that, I probably need to go and speak to people in customer service. And I probably need to work with data scientists, etc., to actually really understand what are the potential kind of correlations, causations, etc., across an entire flow. So basically, content people just have to spend a lot of time working with other people to solve the problems of how do we really measure impact, so that we end up with a much more kind of complete dashboard that other people are also invested into. And here's the other thing. There are many people across your organization who are interested in these questions, and they just need you to go and spark the investigation that allows you to really understand the overall impact.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that you said there, if you can somehow kind of dashboard it, publicize it, and it doesn't have to be dashboarding, it can just be publicizing how you link that content to performance that other people or other departments will be interested in. You talked about it earlier. What are the things the other business units be in? Loyalty, NPS, those kind of things. And speed to market. I think it's those kind of things that you need to be sort of thinking about. Are these things that you've done? Is that how you've linked it? Have you done that in the past? I.e., gone to those departments? Did you manage to pull that off? And if so, how long did it take you to do that kind of stuff? What are the timescales? You said about a 3 to 5 year plan. This should be in those plans, right? And I'm just wondering about how you pull that off and what the timescales you can sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so definitely I've done it. Generally I will have done whatever I preach. Because again, I like to be hands-on. I like to try and find new ways of doing things as well. It was a constant effort to make sure that we were kind of properly integrating or properly relating, should we say, to the rest of the business in the context of booking. But frankly, I see it in most businesses for content teams. Sometimes I would just try to align at a kind of much higher level with, other senior directors, VPs, whatever, SVPs, have a chance to sit down with them at least, once or twice a year to really understand strategically, where are you going? So at least I have kind of full context. And then typically in those conversations, I would start to see things, maybe I can help you with this, or, that's interesting, you want to expand into this market because we're probably underinvested then and we probably need to do a little bit more, or we can do this. Quite a few markets where Booking was very interested in exploring kind of growth over the years. China, for example, very publicly, did invest quite a lot in China for quite a few years. And then logically, one of my teams was also going to support very heavily. We had people in Shanghai who would work very, very closely on this and collaborate and make sure that we're producing the right content for the Chinese market. So have to be out there. At one point, this is quite a few years ago, we even had a team of account managers just for the content agency, which was because I sort of set content up as an agency, sort of an internal agency for all the different stakeholders. So we would even have, account managers. I think there was a team of 2 or 3 account managers would then go out and spend time with stakeholders across the business. And what we saw over time is that it actually shifted from account management, which was a little more reactive, to actually biz dev, which is now I am working proactively with different parts of the business to understand what their needs are, and proactively suggest or work with them to co-author or content solutions. That's very exciting. I mean, that's a really cool place to be.
That's really interesting. Much more proactive. I love that shift from sort of being reactive to sort of proactive, and actually going out and saying, well, where could we actually add values to other parts of the business? That's interesting. So talking about shifts, which is a terrible segue, I know, but I'm doing my best. Talking about shifts, AI is massive, and it's almost a standard question I have to ask at the moment is your thoughts on AI. And you've definitely spoken about, written about, and commented on the belief that AI can't solve all the problems in content and localization on its own. But what do you think, from your perspective, people need to get right, think about before scaling AI across, all of your content workflows?
So AI obviously isn't a kind of straight out of the box solution. Only in the heads of some very senior people across many organizations who think that, but it's not a magic wand. It still needs direction. It still needs someone to choose the right models and to deploy it and give it scope and give it purpose. You still need to determine that it's the right tool for the challenge that you're solving. Because we saw that. I know that the delta in terms of kind of quality of machine translation through AI models and conventional MT models, that delta is gradually kind of closing. But the reality is, translating something with AI typically is still going to be considerably more expensive than using some of the kind of older machine translation models. Still neural-based machine translation models. So we don't necessarily need a very complex solution for a lot of these things. We need very simple solutions sometimes. I think the fundamental form factor of the hammer hasn't really evolved in several thousand years because it's still very good at driving a nail into a wall. That's all I need it for. So I don't like things to be over complicated. Now clearly AI can close that kind of value triad. The old kind of adage of kind of fast, cheap, or pick two. And AI, of course, allows us to, tech in general, but AI in particular, allows us to start saying, well, actually, maybe I don't need to compromise. But even then, it brings in so much complexity. and actually, my anxiety is that we deploy very, very complex solutions, which then need to be maintained. And these models degrade over time. Stuff degrades over time. APIs break. You have outages, which then have catastrophic kind of domino effect across an entire process. And then suddenly the person who, first built these connectors or whatever isn't in the organization anymore, and so on and so forth, which is to say you need to be really damn sure that it's solving real business problems. And I think that for me, the challenge at the moment is just that a lot of AI adoption is led at the top. In fact, if I were being very, very cynical, I'd say it's actually led by investors, because it's almost impossible these days to be the CEO of any kind of decent sized company, particularly a listed company, and admit that you aren't using AI. People are going to put this person living in the 20th century. This is not an investable company anymore, right? Presumably they're just throwing money out of the window, or potentially not actually at all. Because it's become very, very obvious this year in particular. So many reports coming out that 80% of AI investments haven't delivered the results that people were expecting, etc. We're definitely kind of turning a corner a little bit. But we've just, because of this insistence that AI be used by CEOs across a range of organizations, it's just led to a lot of performative use of AI, and that bugs me. Because again, it's not rooted in business problems. It's not rooted in customer experience. It's not rooted in anything that's really material. It's just optics, and that's kind of bullshit. So but that's become such a commonplace across so many different industries now that it's. I think everyone sees it. There is huge amounts of value, but it's just going to take a long time, and it's going to take very, very careful deployment, etc.
Yeah, like many technology problems that have been solved and then resurfaced over the many years I think I've been in it, 20 years and I've seen things come and go. It's definitely not going. I think the key thing is that it needs time to settle and work out how things hang together, and it will become much better. And you are seeing sort of green shoots in lots of places for it to work. But I think there's definitely between content, any teams actually, because AI is a technology essentially, you've got much more collaboration between technical and engineering teams. And from your perspective or in your experience, when you're embedding, what does good collaboration look like between those teams? Because, content teams, they might be brilliant writers and producing great content, creative and all of that. They're not necessarily ideal bedfellows with the technical and more engineering teams, or unless you tell me otherwise. Not my experience of it.
No, I mean, of course, in any content, of course, sometimes there are people who are highly, highly technical, and I've worked with some brilliant content people who are very, very technical, but of course, it's not necessarily the thing that they're most passionate about when they kind of get out of bed in the morning, which is fair enough. I mean, neither for me. So I'm a huge believer in. So I do quite a lot of executive coaching these days. So part of my brain is very much around content. Part of my brain is very much around kind of leadership topics. And what I see more and more conversation I have with leaders, what I see is that there are very, very few challenges that can't be overcome with a really good, transparent conversation, where we have a chance to understand where the other side is coming from and what matters to you and what's at stake for you and what's at risk for you and how can I help you. I mean, this is, for me, one of the most powerful questions always is like, how can I help you? How do we basically kind of approach these problems, not with a spirit of kind of competition, but of a collaboration and more than that, because we always talk about collaboration, on a curiosity. How do you approach this? I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know what this means for the future, but I'm interested. I'm curious. I'm happy to park long-term ramifications of where this is going. And I'm simply going to look at it with real kind of curiosity. Now, within that, you have to still set guardrails and boundaries. You have to define what success looks like. It's incredibly important. Tech people like tech solutions, content people like content solutions. Let's go with that. That's very high level, but let's assume. And therefore, there are always some biases. We have biases based on our experiences. I know many tech organizations, product organizations, for example, they just want localization to be instantaneous. Let's say translation. We can just use machine translation for everything because that way it goes live very, very fast. Because what matters to them is speed. It's just about velocity. It's just about shipping product and then seeing the impact that it's going to have. Okay, fine. That's what matters to you. Now, what matters to the other side of and now can we have a conversation around this? Now, in the context of that, can we define what success would look like if we're going to experiment around some of these technologies? And then can we actually do retrospectives? Can we actually do the postmortems? Once we again, time box it, we are going to work like this. We are going to collaborate for 3 months. And at the end of these 3 months, we expect to see these results. 3 months later, did we get these results? Yes, no. Was this successful? Yes, no. Because otherwise, again, just for optics, etc., too many things we just kind of blindly kind of wander into. We don't make conscious choices. Sorry, that's a very circuitous route.
I love it. I love it.
Be conscious.
Yeah, be conscious and test and talk essentially.
Talk. Be curious and be conscious.
Yeah. So look, we're getting towards the end, Chris. I've kept you for far too long, but let's just get a little bit of your view on looking ahead. What do you think it's going to change most about how content teams are built, staffed, and where do you see kind of localization, multilingual content play a part in that?
I mean, I think AI has huge near-term application in things like, say, quality management or more intelligent routing, in process optimization, these kind of things. I think AI is going to be, model selection, those kind of things. I think that these are incredibly logical, near-term, very tangible kind of use cases for AI. I think midterm, it's very interesting how you can build, kind of safeguarded models that allow you to actually scale. Maybe the sort of descriptive lower funnel content that I was talking about, but also, the kind of upper funnel content, the more inspirational, engaging, etc. Probably even some sort of personalization layer. I mean, personalization and content, this is a very, very interesting topic wrestled with for many, many years. And I've always said, localization is basically the first step towards personalization.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Because it's basically you're saying, hey, there is a subgroup. These are all of our entire customer base or user base. There is a subgroup. They happen to prefer this language. Fantastic. So we understand a little bit about personalization, but it's a very, very binary thing at the moment. So potentially AI allows us to start working with lots of different types of personas, but I'm not seeing anyone do it very, very effectively. Not much better than, for example, Amazon for years and years on the basis of whatever you're buying. Probably, if you're using Amazon, you're probably using it fairly often. It's able to build very, very solid data profile around your entire persona. And therefore it says, hey, you like this book, then you may well like this book as well. And they can do that. It's a very basic data model behind it. But so you see that potentially that sort of thing can get a little more sophisticated, and content that kind of ties it together can get a lot more sophisticated. But I think it's going to be longer term before that becomes like a more kind of widespread thing, if we get there. And then longer term, I think, one thing that's very interesting for me is the shift to video. I don't quite know. Like I'll freely admit, I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows exactly what direction social media is going right now. Because on one hand, I see kind of growth year on year, but then actually the last 2-3 years, some areas have been slowing a little bit. And then I hear a kind of, I start to read articles about, kind of Gen Alpha, etc. Not very interested in video, or don't want to be in this kind of virtual environment anymore. So it's a little unclear to me, but I suspect that because older people like myself, are probably adopting video, and because that's where typically the money skews in society, there will continue to be investment in kind of video content. And then we're really talking about, we're definitely talking about AI applications there. We're also talking about multilingual content, stuff that can be pushed very, very quickly, all this kind of interesting sort of virtual dubbing and stuff like this. Yeah. Like that, I think
avatars.
Exactly. Like that for sure will be a solved problem. If it isn't quite yet, but it will be for sure in a very kind of scalable way in the future. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and then and deeper personalization, and that really is reliant more than anything on the data layer. Like, do I even know enough about this person to be able to personalize for them? That's actually the bigger challenge, frankly, than the content piece.
Data layer, context, tagging, all of those things that personalization, for years has been talking about. Let's not get into that. That's a whole nother podcast. But anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So look, very last one word answers. There's the closing kind of stuff that we do. So global growth in one word.
Exciting.
Excellent.
I mean, it's the thrill of adventure, right? Expanding into new markets. Oh, why not?
Yeah, love it. Exciting. And then just finally, a book or podcast other than this that you're loving right now.
So book-wise, actually, I had it. Where is it? Oh, here we go. Yeah. This one I'm just reading at the moment. It's really cool. The history of occult thinking around the world. I love this sort of thing. I also write books in my spare time. That's another thing entirely. But I'm very interested in these kind of topics. Podcast. It's been 2 or 3 years now. I like history podcasts because otherwise it's just a lot of self-promoting rubbish.
Yeah,
like this. Look at me right now. And my absolute favorite the last couple of years, Fall of Civilizations, the Paul Cooper podcast. If you listen to that. It's brilliant. It's because it's from a content perspective, they're amazing. It's like the absolute high watermark of UGC. Someone who is just insanely passionate about this particular topic and spends months researching and putting together. And these can be like 3-4 hour episodes. These are vast, and it's taking the full of all the different civilizations around the world. Which is just, and it's going to end badly, from the beginning. At the end you always know, but it's how is it going to end badly? And it's always the level of detail and research. It's like, oh, that's what this medium is for. People really, really kind of putting their absolute heart, soul, all their passion into this incredible content, which just brings these massive historical lessons to life. And the overarching lesson being, hey, it all ends the same way.
I'll definitely give it a listen. Well, I mean, and that's it. And Chris, I just want to say what a fascinating, conversation running through all the beginning from your, start of your career all the way through running those massive content teams and thinking about actually the future of where it's all headed. So look, I just want to thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll see you again on the podcast in the somewhat future. But thanks again, Chris. That was brilliant and fascinating.
Thanks so much, Jason.
Chris, thanks for joining us today. You shared some amazing and brilliant insights on building global content engines and teams whilst maintaining that kind of trust, consistency and relevance in whatever markets people are in. I'm sure our team, our listeners and everybody else will take a lot from the conversation. And that's it for another episode of In Other Words, the podcast from Phrase. I've been your host, Jason Hemingway, and a massive thank you again to Chris Dell for sharing his insights on scaling global content and building, content operating models that support business goals and sustainable growth. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do subscribe to In Other Words on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or indeed your preferred podcast platform. You can also find more conversations on leadership, growth, and global execution at phrase.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.